This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome in, folks. Episode number 91 here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Nick Maxon joining me to my left if you're watching the YouTube screen, or also joining me audio version wise, myself, Noah Grant, here for episode number 91. And we're happy to have our listeners, as always, on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. The men's hockey team for St. Cloud State has been off this week, so we don't have any men's college hockey news to talk about as far as the Huskies are concerned, but the women's team was back in action down in Mankato this weekend. We'll discuss that, as well as some team that's also a little bit down south from the St. Cloud Granite City area, some team called the Minnesota Wild that seem to be doing all right as of late. Nick, we'll have to touch on what they're up to. And then our extra ice session, we're going to talk about a play that shocked the hockey world. Well, I should say the hockey world, except for one being in particular that happens to be a certain studio analyst. We'll talk about that and more. And we're going to start off with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
For the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah, as you mentioned before, the women's team in action down south of Mankato, and it was a tough weekend for them. They lose Friday 3-0 at the hands of Mankato. A trio of second period goals is what gave them the advantage in Friday night's series opener. And then moving to today's game, we just got over not too long ago, a little bit tighter. Mankato jumping up to a 2-0 lead. Allie Cornelius, though, gets an unassisted goal in the second to bring it to 1 goal. Unfortunately, though, it was an empty netter to seal the deal. So a 3-1 Saturday defeat for the Huskies. Sonny Oholda, although tonight, very good, stopping 30 shots. So unfortunately, Huskies 0 for 3 also on the power play. And Mankato was 1 for 2 on their advantages. So unfortunately, Noah, again, women still looking to try to get back in the win column in conference play.
Yeah, like you mentioned, 6-11-1 overall, 2-11-1 in conference play. They're going to have some time off, just like the men's team. They kind of get back started around the same time. Of course, men's hockey, December 30th against Bemidji State in Bemidji that Friday night, while the women's team will be traveling and playing the next day, January 1st, and then the following day, Penn State, Boston University, Syracuse, 2022 Battle of the Berg is where they're going to be facing off out east. Let's go the opposite of out east, Nick, and how about out west? The Arizona Coyotes, their saga continuing, and kind of a confusing story that we're trying to follow. Apparently they're back square with Gila River Arena in the city of Glendale in the state of Arizona, kind of, sort of, but not really, but kind of. Anyway, $1.3 million in state and city taxes, and apparently back rent, from what we know, that they've paid all their bills and tax liabilities now. Beforehand, it was supposed to be, and thankful to Katie Strang of The Athletic, who does a fantastic job, that the Coyotes were going to be out of Gila River Arena. That's a mouthful. If they failed to settle up by December 20th. So, they were kind of told essentially to not let team employees or arena vendors into the facility until they paid that fee after December 20th. And a letter from city manager Kevin Phelps, who is kind of the representative for the arena and in relation to the city of Glendale, said about $250,000 was owed, with the rest owed to the state in relation to that. And he also mentioned that he had a good talk with NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman and informed him of the situation on Wednesday, because it could be potential travel restrictions and things for NHL teams. And it was a pretty short conversation. Gary Bettman essentially thanked him and said, this isn't very good news. And no, it's not, Nick, as we know that it's been a $1.7 million bid for the Coyotes out in Tempe near Arizona State University. And the Saga
$7 billion, I believe, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of money. And
yeah,
I think the culprit is things aren't going well for Arizona off the ice, and on the ice, they really aren't much better, unfortunately.
No, and apparently to build off that, we talked about this last week, Noah, is that there still seems to be some involvement, again, with Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport involved in this proposal. Again, these things can drag out months. And so, at first when the story broke, I really thought that, this would have maybe proved some validity to that story that broke last week, where again, I sort of denounced a little bit as the team is for sale and trying to move again. I explained that in the last episode. I won't recap it here, but when this, came forward, it was like, okay, well, something is wrong with the money. And their explanation for this too, Noah, is quite curious as what they're calling it a human error. I don't know how you do a human error for this amount of money, Noah, but nonetheless, things still in disarray in Arizona for sure.
Yeah, if someone wants to have a human error of that amount of dollars to the Huskies Warming House podcast, we do have an address and a PayPal. So nonetheless, Nick, it's kind of funny. I don't think Arizona right now over the past week is having as much woes GM and franchise-wise, though, as some of the teams around the National Hockey League.
Well, you could say either as well as or maybe fresh starts, right? Because a couple of teams did indeed overhaul their front offices. Vancouver being one of them. Of course, longtime GM Jim Benning and head coach Travis Green were relieved of their duties, bringing in former Pittsburgh Penguins general manager Jim Rutherford. Right now, vice president of hockey operations and interim GM is his official title. So he's will be, I would imagine, part of the search to find a permanent general manager. But as of now, doing dual duties in that case. But how about this? Former Minnesota Wild coach Bruce Boudreau was the also taking over as head coach, and so far 3-0 under Boudreau out there for Vancouver. So. It's been a good influence so far. We'll have to see if that success continues out there. Philadelphia, how about this? Lane Vigneault also was sent packing here this last week, and it was Mike Yeo, another former Minnesota Wild coach, that was the defensive assistant, taking over officially with the interim tag as they search for a permanent coach. Now, mind you, Mike Yeo may end up being the candidate at the end of the season if he proves his track record well, or vice versa. But how fitting was it that Chuck Fletcher, who hired Mike Yeo as the head coach back from Minnesota, I believe 2012 or so.
13, yeah.
A good 2012, 2013. Mm-hmm. They're back together now out east of Philadelphia. So very interesting there. And then more so on a grander scale, right? You talk about things that are changing. How about this? Gary Bettman noting that it will be up to the players to participate in the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Now, interestingly enough, Noah, this was just this morning, is that it sounds like the Olympic Committee has said that if there are a positive test, that the Chinese law says that you must quarantine for anywhere from, was it 21 days to 5 weeks?
Yeah.
So that might put a little bit of a different taste in some of these players' mouths as far as if they decide to go. Now, mind you, I forget the exact date, but somewhere in January, I believe it's January 10th, where the NHL can withdraw from participation without penalty. But that story continues to evolve. And I would imagine with this latest development in terms of COVID sort of procedural stuff, that might change things moving forward. But notably, speaking of which, Robin Lehner, who would be on Team Sweden if he's on that roster, has offered to play and will stay with Vegas Golden Knights, as far as him not wanting to go to the Olympics. So, you talk about citing his mental health concerns. That's one way to look at it. But I would imagine, too, just the quarantine period, I think NHL players and I think also organizations might look at a sour eye for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's I think obvious to say it takes a lot for a player to not want to represent their country on the biggest stage in sport, so to speak. So there's definitely some things that go along with that. Like you mentioned, mental health, the piece obviously about the travel restrictions, the COVID restrictions, those sort of things. It's a very interesting thought process. And I always know that similar to how the World Juniors kind of affect the college hockey world, obviously the Olympics have a disruption in the NHL schedule and world quite a bit in the way that works too. So there are some teams that would, I would say the Minnesota Wild might be one of them that would be a little bit unwilling to relinquish potential players that might actually make the roster should any of them be candidates as well too. So, definitely a decision that is up to the players, and we'll have to see where it goes from there. Speaking of players, Nick, a couple of milestones for some NHLers and a couple of players that are also hurt, and one retirement that we just got hot off the press. Of course, we're reporting this on Saturday night, December 11th. Let's start with the injuries. New Jersey goaltender Jonathan Bernier, he's on injured reserve, and Lindy Ruff says it's not looking good. His hip injury is really concerning for him, so hopefully he's going to be all right. Sounds a little more long-term there. In Buffalo, Casey Middlestat, former Minnesota Golden Gopher, he's out indefinitely after upper body surgery. Pittsburgh's Jake Gensel, he's week to week with an upper body injury. And Winnipeg's Blake Wheeler, no timetable for him yet, but he looks to be out for the foreseeable future. Don't know if you had a chance to look at that one, but it was a pretty nasty collision against the Vancouver Canucks where his knee bent really awkwardly as he was kind of crashing the net there and had two guys coming the other direction kind of fall awkwardly on that, I would say lateral part of his leg, so to speak. And quick comment on Blake Wheeler. Yeah, not pretty, but even more, I guess, timing wise, though, just received his silver stick. So his 1000th NHL game, I believe, was last week. And Winnipeg did a nice tribute for him. So you talk about milestones, not a good way to follow up. And as you mentioned, that fall did not look very pretty. Yeah, definitely. It hasn't been a twist, so to speak. Kidding. Hoping that he's going to be all right. Of course, another former Minnesota Golden Gopher who scored a pretty iconic goal back in the 2007 WCHA Final Five against North Dakota. If you haven't seen it, go look it up. It's cool. Anyway, lastly, let's talk about some of those milestones as well as a retirement. Let's start in Tampa Bay. Head coach John Cooper, the fastest NHL coach to 400 wins, sitting 39th all time. In the total wins column and 50th in games coached. Now, mind you, one of the caveats to this, same with the next person we're going to talk on this list, the shootout era has kind of helped things a little bit where coaches and players are able to kind of get there a little bit quicker. So moving over to Chicago netminder Marc-Andre Fleury joined Martin Brodeur and Patrick Waugh as the only three goalies to hit 500 wins in NHL history with a 2-0 shutout at the Bell Center in Montreal. Lastly, speaking of goaltenders, this one is our hot off the press topic here, and it's Ben Bishop, former Tampa Bay Lightning goaltender, a Dallas Star as well too. He's hanging up the pads after 11 years in the National Hockey League due to his knee injury that's kind of been ailing him since March 10th of 2020. He made 3 appearances during the bubble in the 2020 playoffs in August. Actually had a pretty good run up until then for Dallas, I would say, but now 35 years old. It's been 14 months that he's been rehabbing the injury, and the club assigned him to the AHL in the past week, made 1 appearance and allowed 8 goals on 34 shots. And general manager Jim Nill said he made the decision himself. This is it. And he doesn't feel that his body can continue. A 3-time Vezina Trophy finalist, 222 wins, 33 shutouts for him in his career, and 5th all time in save percentage on that list behind Dominic Hasek, Ken Dryden, Tuukka Rask, and Jack Campbell. So the 6'7" netminder is going to take his time and enjoy time with family. Unfortunately, it's some tough news for him. He's a great goaltender, kind of a staple of Tampa Bay Lightning hockey in the mid 2010s for a long time. They had that Stanley Cup final run, and hopefully we'll see him on to bigger and better things in the hockey world. Once again, folks, welcome in episode number 91. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, it's a pleasure to have you here on this Saturday night. For those of you listening on Sunday morning and beyond, we are recording a half a day early, if you will. The Minnesota Wild play tonight, Los Angeles at 9:30 p.m. Nick, how are you doing on this Saturday night? What are you up to? I see you got the Christmas lights behind you. Did you put those up? How's the festive season? No, you're not a Christmas light. Are you a Christmas light guy, or are you I'm not doing that at all kind of guy?
I'm the I don't have time for anything kind of guy. So, but seriously though, it's finals time So did a Spanish final yesterday, which mind you was a recorded oral exam. So, you had to come up essentially a script. You had to do a taped presentation, and let's just say my short-term memory is not like it was. So many takes were needed, and it was not pretty. But got it done. So that class is now finished. Just have a math final to finish up, and then the semester will be officially done. So it's definitely a crunch time for me, but definitely, I don't know. It's not that I'm not in the festive mood, but I think my brain hasn't shifted away. It's because, again, going into now, and it's strange to say this, my final semester, thank Christ, of college after quite the road to get here. It's almost surreal to think about, but looking just to try to finish strong and just get it done. So haven't really quite gotten into the moods of the holidays just yet, just because there's still work to be done.
Yeah, no, I definitely know the feeling. You and I had a discussion before we started. I just finished my exams this week, and I had a closing bout with the ATI testing for nursing school. For those of you who don't know, the NCLEX, of course, is the big nursing board that you have to pass. And the ATI tests are over various things, fundamentals, pharmacology, med surg, whatever it may be, are kind of designed to be harder than the NCLEX, that when you hit that actual board license examination that you're able to pass it hopefully with ease. But it doesn't make things any easier. A passing mark is barely over 50% on these types of tests. So it kind of lets you know the kind of stress that they incur on us. And I was able to pass mine yesterday on Friday. So I am home free. I am off for 4 weeks until January 10th. So I'm really looking forward to the time off, but I totally empathize, Nick, because I studied for 25 hours this week, and definitely know what it's like to kind of say, I'm not
studying.
Yeah. Well, regardless. And I kind of know the feeling though of, saying until I hit 1 o'clock on this Friday, I haven't thought beyond that. I don't know what's going to happen beyond that, but that's my focus in mind. So definitely a trying time. If you know a college student, I definitely give them the benefit of the doubt during finals week, because it definitely is a difficult time for a lot of people, especially in broadcasting or healthcare. They are kind of stressful professions in the public eye. Speaking of the public eye, Nick, talking about some women's hockey, we're going to start there. I think their matchup against Mankato, and a public eye showing, unfortunately, that was not so great for the women's hockey team. They've been able to keep these games low scoring, but you can't get away with scoring just one goal on the weekend, and an unassisted goal at that. Allie Cornelius, the lone goal scorer. Sonia Hola doing everything she can to keep the team afloat, if you will. But like you mentioned on Friday, 3 second period goals for Mankato and a 3-0 win. Then the Huskies clawed their way back to 2-1 today on Saturday, but weren't able to find that equalizer, and then an empty netter with just a second to play to make it 3-1. Nick, I mean, you got a chance to watch this team last week too. They had a pair of 1-goal losses against Bemidji. This is a team that they moved to, 6-11-1, but theoretically, if they grabbed all 4 of these games, they would be, 10-7-1 overall in their record. If I can do some math very quickly there, that was very challenging. As you well know, I mean, not that we expected to get them all 4 to get all 4 in the win column, but I think we expected at least 1 or 2 to go the Huskies direction. I mean, they have some time off. What does this Huskies team do that seemed like they were trending in the right direction offensively, and then just really have gone cold in the past couple of weeks?
Well, I think it starts with just puck possession in the offensive zone. Generating offense for this team has been challenging, to say it lightly. Over the past few seasons, it's been a big reason to where they've been in the WCHA. But, and we talked about this last week, and I was actually quite critical of some of the things that I saw with this team. And it's not that, you want to come in here and point out some of the negativities, but, talk about teams that are in the upper echelon of the WCHA, and you talk about where the Huskies are, and they're doing some of those things. And more importantly, they're also not doing some of the things that I'm seeing from the Huskies as well. I think the biggest challenge for them is the puck possession. They're not generating a scoring chance off of that possession. That's really where the fault is. At the end of the day, there just seems to be a lot of like either miscommunication, or there seems to be not knowing where we're supposed to be. A lot of folks out of position, not reading the play and anticipating the play, more importantly. And so when you combine that with, I would say reactive plays as well, where the Huskies, especially on the blue line and the offensive zone, seem to be very comfortable with just not taking a look or maybe taking an extra stride. And you rarely see the blue liners, the Husky squad, get a puck on net. They're stuck on the end walls. They just love to cycle the puck back low, which, in fault's never a wrong play, but they also aren't really a threat to put the puck on the net. So it really makes it easier for the defending squad to really defend them. So that's the biggest step that they need to take some of that possession time, which they've been much better this season. But what they've been not good at is getting those pucks into those dangerous areas and getting good quality chances on that. That's the piece that they're missing.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, it's funny you mentioned the defensive activation. I remember a couple of years ago when you and I were at St. Cloud together, I was actually our good friend Rachel Herzog, and one of the big stepping stones for her in her senior year was actually the ability to get to the middle of the ice and put pucks on net. It actually became a running theme where she wasn't scoring a lot, but she was creating opportunities. She was averaging like 6 or 7 shots a game from the back end, which is pretty good defensively. And then that's where I think, losing a player like Olivia Hansen, maybe she was kind of a staple on that power play, and just as a one-time option, just having a defenseman that, like you mentioned, you go back to the men's hockey team, your Jack Ashans, your Jimmy Schultz, your Nick Perbixes. Look how many shot attempts Nick Perbix had, I believe, in the game on Friday against North Dakota. I think he had 8 shot attempts or shots on goal, if I'm not mistaken. Not every play has to be, like we mentioned, in grade A, where you're barreling down the slot and you walk around, 2 forwards to get a shot on net from the point. But they teach defenders so much, is that, if you can step to the middle, or at least make the play a little bit unpredictable enough to where you can get a shot through a lane. I mean, a shot on goal is a shot on goal. It's an opportunity. You're making a goaltender make a save. You have a chance for redirections, traffic in front. You never know what's going to happen, but you can't score if the puck doesn't go on net, obviously. So, and like you mentioned, puck possession time doesn't mean a whole lot if you're not able to, at some point, get off the half wall or get out of the corners and try to threaten the middle of the ice. And unfortunately, that has been a trend that we've seen from this women's hockey team over the past couple of years, is that their chances are either kind of one and dones coming off the rush, or if they're not able to generate enough zone time that leads to pushing towards the middle of the ice right now. And then right now, this last weekend, unfortunately, really showed on the scoreboard. And, the weekend before, they had, 3 goals on Friday night, but then it was a 2-1 loss on Saturday as well, too. So the offensive well is not clicking as intended. I guess my question is, you're the coaching staff right now. Is it a matter of, adjusting the mentality of how the team forechecks? Is it a matter of adjusting the way the forecheck is actually structured? How do you find a way to get the offensive oil flowing again for this women's hockey team?
Well, as what a former coach, Bruce Boudreau, would say, is that, at this level, both you and your opponent, there's only so many ways you can play hockey, right? To me, it's not necessarily that is the structure of the forecheck, but how you execute it. And to me, I think what the biggest execution piece missing for this women's squad is the girls without the puck. I think that's the biggest thing. The puck possession in the corners when I watched 2 weekends was actually pretty good. But oftentimes you saw, this one play sticks out to me. It was the far corner, and the puck was going up the wall, and the defenseman was pinching. And instead of one winger hanging down in the corner as a passing option, both were essentially trying to cover for the defenseman. So there's no communication there. So in other words, the defenseman didn't have a play. She was being, pressured to the wall. She could put it back down to the corner, and there was nobody there to go retrieve the puck. So it's basically like, okay, well, here, have the puck, you guys. I have no idea what else to do. So there's a lot of that needs to change. And I think also too, just, you talk about active defense too. When was the last time that you watched a St. Cloud hockey game and not just pinching in the wall, but actually getting involved, like getting on top of the circles? I mean, watch what Mark Johnson does with Wisconsin. You almost have 4 or 5 players involved in the offensive zone. I just don't think there's enough involvement from the Huskies D. I just don't think so. So, and a big reason I think why we're going to talk about the Wild here a little bit later, why they've been so successful offensively, is because everybody goes and their wings cover for them. There's communication, and that's what the women are missing. You're just, there's no, it's just too easy. You're defending 3 people on the ice when there's 5. And that's just not enough involvement from everybody. And I just also, as I mentioned before, doesn't feel like everybody's on the same page when they're on the ice.
Yeah, and the other piece of this too is it's a lot easier to have your defensemen jump up when they're fresh off a shift and they're not defending in their own zone too, right? That extended time in your own zone definitely, puts pressure on things. And I do remember, in my high school days, of course, my head coach, David Hoff, who's the head coach of the U.S. Olympic sled hockey team, did a lot with USA Hockey and got to go to a lot of those NHL level coaching seminars. And one of the things that we picked up on is, entering the zone, usually you have 3 layers of flow, so to speak, when you enter a zone. You have the puck carrier who enters first, and then you have a winger who drives the net, and then someone who kind of stays high. But then if you have a really good offense, you have maybe a defenseman who's on the weak side or kind of in the middle, who's what we call a flat drop pass option, meaning they're kind of diagonally open behind you and able to support that play. And the Huskies don't have that. And sometimes they don't even have that second winger that's driving or hanging back to create that option. And like you talked about, speaking of the specific play that you mentioned, sometimes one of the best things I enjoyed as a player, and especially as a winger offensively, because I love to score goals. And one of the things that was nice is, if we turn the puck over, the puck got cycled from low to high, and I was the player in the corner, it was nice because you would see everybody move up towards that defenseman or kind of shift back towards the middle of the ice. And if you're down in the corner, why move? Obviously there are times to move, but sometimes just stay put, stay in the soft, quiet areas of the ice. You're suddenly a passing option because all of the chaos, all of the flow has moved away from you. And now you're a quiet option back on the weak side where the play just made. Why do you think players run scissor plays all the time? Because it forces the defenseman to go one way and the other player is that option on the weak side. And that's what the men's hockey team, when they're really clicking, does so well. And some of these best goal scorers, a great example is Easton Brodzinski, not a guy who's very fleet of foot, but the way his game is successful, he's a goal scorer and he's a shooter. So when he's not possessing the puck, he finds a quiet area. Vieti Mietin's kind of the same way too, finds a quiet area of the ice and suddenly, boom, the puck's on his stick and he wastes no time shooting. And you're like, wait, I didn't realize he was open on the back door there. I didn't know he was, had the puck all of a sudden. And that's what good players do. And it feels like they're always in the right position, but really they're finding ways to create their own open patch of ice and anticipate very, very well.
And on talk, you talk about the anticipation too. It has to be from the puck carrier to understand that, that player is finding open ice. And, at the collegiate level, even more in the pro levels, right? That window is not going to be glaring with a big, red flashing beacon of light. You have to sort of be anticipatory and trust that that player is going to be there too. So that's when a little bit of that structure comes into, and also knowing your line mates. But again, for women's hockey, especially, I think I used this last weekend, they're very much reactionary right now, and they're not being proactive and not creating their own luck right now. They're very much almost surviving the offensive zone. So there's definitely work to be done there.
Yeah, another guy to watch, NHL level, by the way, that does that very well. Some guy named Kirill Kaprizov does that very well in terms of anticipation. And it's funny, I was sitting and watching the game a couple of weekends ago when I went home for Thanksgiving, and my dad said, Kirill Kaprizov kind of reminds me, honestly, of Wayne Gretzky. And I'm like, that's a bold comparison there. But he kind of talked me through it. And he said, well, Wayne Gretzky's, name of the game was anticipation, and his office was below the goal line. Well, Kirill Kaprizov is kind of the same way in that he is usually 1 or 2 steps ahead, not necessarily in terms of creating turnovers and those things like Wayne Gretzky was, but more often when he does get the puck, he knows that even though he's going behind the net, he knows what Matt Zuccarello is doing. He knows what Ryan Hartman is about to do 3, 4, 5 seconds before it happens. And that's what good players do, is like you mentioned, the player with the puck is important, but usually they're the least important if everything is clicking correctly, because the players without the puck are making plays. And hey, what's the fastest thing on the ice? By the way, speaking of defense, it's good to have a defenseman who can pick their way out of the zone, but also fastest thing on the ice is the puck. So move the darn thing, pass it, and hit the tape and move with numbers and speed. Speaking of moving on to things, Nick, why don't we move on to some Minnesota Wild stuff and our trivia question for this week? And this one was a stumper for a lot of people. Part of it might've been the way it was asked. We were talking about some regular season finishes in the Western Conference, but the question did pertain to our Minnesota Wild, and it did read: the Minnesota Wild have been on a tear recently atop the Western Conference. Since the team began in 2000, what is the best finishing position in the Western Conference in Wild history, and what was the year of that finish? Nick, do you happen to know what year this might be?
I remember seeing this earlier, but I do know it was second. And was it 16-17?
It was 2016-17, a second place finish only to Chicago by a game in the Western Conference. This one stumped a lot of people. In addition, because a lot of people, it was actually intentional this time. I asked the question because the Wild have had some higher divisional finishes, including 2008-09 winning the Northwest Division, that have still seen them sitting at third in the Western Conference. So it was kind of one that you really had to dig deep on that one and take a look at. But Eric was our winner. I'm not going to pronounce his handle because it's about 27 letters and a lot of letters at that. But nonetheless, he has been a repeat winner for us. Like we mentioned, the team that year was 49, 25, and 8. To put that in perspective, Chicago had 50 wins that year. The Wild were led by a guy named Mikhail Granlund. He led the team in points with, how about this, only 69 points for him that year. He was team leader. And Devin Dubnyk's career high in goalie wins that season with 40. This year, the Minnesota Wild, 19-6-1, +3 in the points column on Calgary, entering tonight's action against the Los Angeles Kings. The Wild, like I mentioned, playing in LA tonight. They'll be in Vegas tomorrow, or what would be today if you're listening on Sunday. Nick Maxon will be in attendance back at the Xcel Energy Center at home on Tuesday against Carolina. Then it's 2 more home games, Thursday and Sunday against Buffalo and Florida, respectively. And then following Dallas, the boys will head there on Monday, the 20th, before a couple of days off before I think it's Detroit that following Thursday. So there's kind of your updated extended schedule a little bit there. But Nick, the number that I think everyone's been paying attention to, and as soon as we say this, I'm sure the Wild will probably lose tonight and we'll jinx it. But nonetheless, the Wild on an 8-game winning streak right now, regardless of the streakness, they've looked good. They've looked good, and there have been a lot of great underlying and overarching signs for this club. What have you liked so far the most over the past couple of weeks?
The 5-on-5 play. We talk about special teams the last couple of weekends, considering the Huskies in North Dakota, especially. But, the NHL, you have to win the 5-on-5 battle. You just absolutely have to. Yes, do we need to see improvement in the panel power play? No question about it. But I think Wild fans, you got to feel happy, especially when it comes to playoff time. Your 5-on-5 game's got to be better. And in fact, I believe it was Vegas last year that actually was very complimentary of the Wild in their 5-on-5 game. If it wasn't for some of special teams, I think Minnesota actually had maybe the upper hand in that series in terms of even strength, essentially goals and whatnot. So I like what I see 5-on-5. I like Cam Talbot too. He's playing lights out hockey right now. If there's maybe one thing I'm a little concerned about is, he's sometimes having to bail out the team a little bit more than I think he should have to. That's a little bit of the way that the Wild are structuring their offense. Dean Evison does want, all 5 guys to be involved and to not be afraid to go in and generate offense. So there are some odd number chances going the other way. So it's sort of expected with the aggressiveness of the offensive nature of his squad. But he's made the big saves when he's needed to. And the penalty kill has been really good too for the Wild. So you got to like what you see. And again, there's no even, when you win the Stanley Cup, there's no perfect team. But, for the deficiency of where this Wild team has been, they've been obviously very successful and like what I see so far.
Yeah, they've been very good. And, how often is it? I want to go back to that phrase that you just said. Cam Talbot has had to bail out this Minnesota Wild team because they've been too offensive at times. When is the last time you've heard a Minnesota Wild club be described that way? I mean, there are so many exciting things.
Never.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about the guy who's been on the trade block and, nothing's really been done because the Wild have been playing so well. And I think he's played all right for the most part too, just really snake bit. That's Kevin Fiala. I mean, his expected goals for is in the negatives, but the way he plays, I mean, he should have 10, 12, 13 more points than the guy does this season. In fact, I kind of want to go back. He's still, he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's tied for 5th on the team with 17 points, 4 goals, 13 assists. So he's still chipping in on the assist column. He's +3 on the season. 89 shots to his credit this season. That's tied for second on the team, that's tied for first on the team with Ryan Hartman, and Kirill Kaprizov has 87 is the only kind of guy that's close as well too. But maybe let's touch on that real quickly here, Nick, before we talk about some of the big guns and the surprising big guns, a la Ryan Hartman. Is Kevin Fiala a guy, as you move farther along in the season, if Minnesota continues to have success? I know there's talk about his contract expiring, the Wild not being able to afford him. Is he a guy you want to remove from this equation, or do you feel like he's still enough of a disruptor that you hang on to him because of what he brings as a utility guy up and down the lineup right now?
It's a fantastic question, right? And we've seen one of those scenarios play out, aka Chuck Fletcher, aka Marty Hansel, Ryan White. Yeah, right. It's kind of both ways, right? Now, talking, if you're in Bill Guerin's shoes, right? We all discussed what's coming next year in terms of the salary cap limitations, obviously contracts thing, but you can't play tomorrow's salary cap now. You just can't. You have to take on and worry about their current season, right? So now, if you were really that concerned about Fiala, mind you, this team is the first in the West, first in the division for sure. First, if not second, the Western Conference. I don't think really right now you really need anything right now from him more than what he's done. I do think he's enough of a disruptor. I think he's enough of a game changer. And as I mentioned before, he should have a lot more goals. And I think the upper management does see that. Can you imagine this Wild Glove if he starts to actually pot some of those? That could be just absolutely nasty. And that's kind of the bigger scope, right? Which is, when you have guys, and we'll touch on Ryan Hartman, Kaprizov, and you got others, you're scoring by committee. That kind of takes a little pressure off Kevin Fiala, right? It's almost like he doesn't have to. But imagine when he does actually start getting the goals and getting those points racked up, that just means his team is much more dangerous, because you're going to have guys go on streaks, right? These players of Fiala's talent are kind of streaky. We've seen that in years past. So right now, I know Minnesota, maybe if there's anything, I know the JT Miller trade talks have been there, but there's two things. Are you really improving your team for right now? Is it worth the trade? And, what do you give up for future if you do that, right? So, and do you disrupt, what you have in the locker room? Because I think if there's anything we've seen over the course of this year, especially with some certain departures, this team looks not only different on the ice, I think they look a lot different off the ice too. So I think, that team bonding is important to this as well. So it's not an easy decision, but if I'm in Bill Guerin's shoes, I don't touch this Wild squad. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You mentioned JT Miller, 27 points in the year for him. Tied for, I guess if you're doing tied, definitely in the top 20 in the NHL. Also with a guy out in Nashville by the name of Mikhail Granlund, 5 goals, 22 assists for him. He's having a good season too. But how about Kirill Kaprizov, tied for 5th in the National Hockey League in points overall, just behind Draisaitl, McDavid, Alex Ovechkin, and a guy by the name of Nazem Kadri. What a year that he's having this season. 11 goals to his credit this year too. But Kirill Kaprizov, 10 goals, 22 assists. There was worried about his scoring touch. I think he's found it. I don't know that he ever lost it per se, but nonetheless, he's looked good. But before we get to him, I did want to mention one thing about Kevin Fiala. I like him for the specific sense that he's a gamer. And I know that's a phrase that you kind of throw around a little bit in the hockey world, but he's a guy where, he's not getting the bounces that he wants, but I love players that play hard every single night. Does he get a little bit overzealous and try to do a bit too much sometimes? Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. But I think I would honestly rather prefer a player that has the ability or tries to be capable enough to carry the game a little bit too much on his shoulders than having a player who I really like Victor Rask, but Victor Rask is never going to be that guy that can take a game on his shoulders like Kevin Fiala can, right? He's just an asset that I think the Minnesota Wild club should be happy to have. And who knows? I know that he had the 1-year deal. They're looking for more production out of him, but at the same time, if his production just for whatever reason doesn't find, that extra gear this year, he might return to being in affordable territory potentially for the Minnesota Wild. I mean, who knows? Maybe the Wild do afford Kevin Fiala at the end of the year if he doesn't, produce the way that they expect, and then he has a breakout year once we start getting out of the Zach Parise, Ryan Suter stuff. But nonetheless, the Wild do have a superstar in Kirill Kaprizov that they're able to build around. He's looked exceptional, and I love. As much as the scoring touch, I love the consistency of his assists, the ability for him to play make. He is a proven playmaker, has been. That really is what his game is. I think his scoring touch is the added tool that people who watch them don't necessarily key in on. I don't see him as a goal scorer. I've always seen him as a playmaker because of his edge work, because of the way that he anticipates and plays. And I know a lot of people that I talk to see him the same way. Ryan Hartman, on the other hand, I don't know what people saw him as, but he's got 13 goals this season, Nick. And a guy that he was a first-round draft pick. Career high is 19 goals for him in his true rookie campaign with Chicago. He's on pace to shatter that if he continues to do any sort of normalcy for him this year.
Completely shatter that.
Yeah, absolutely. One, what has allowed Ryan Hartman to settle his game down and find that consistency? Is it playing in the top six? Is it taking the opportunity? What is it? And number two, is this something, is this something that we should be accustomed to seeing Ryan Hartman doing in the future? Is this the new Ryan Hartman, or is this kind of an Eric Staal situation where, yes, he's a great hockey player, but we don't expect him to produce at that level again?
Oof. So let's preface it this way. Eric Staal, when he did that, was what, 35?
Yeah, 35. Yeah.
Right? Ryan Hartman's what, 27, 28? So there's a difference there. Also, the talent that's around him is vastly different. Ryan Hartman, when he came in the league, when you look at players and you're discussing and you're scouting, what their strengths are and whatnot, Ryan Hartman was a guy that had a lot of tools in the toolbox, right? But at the NHL level, it's, what tools come out and what tools can you string together to be a complete player, right? Hartman was always good defensively. He's always had a pretty decent shot. Maybe not the best passer, maybe not the best playmaker. So what he's got is he's got two, maybe some of the best playmakers in the National Hockey League. And you take a guy that has strength with the shot, and mind you, being a right-handed shot, not easy to find around the National Hockey League these days. And let's not say this. You're playing with confidence, too. I think confidence is huge, especially for people that love to shoot the puck. And for Ryan Hartman right now, he's got the perfect storm that's just, coming together for him. I think he's in the perfect situation for his game. I think his game complements the other two that is on his line, and Zuccarello and Kaprizov. And again, when the team is winning, when you're shooting the puck and it's going in the net, again, broke, don't fix it. So I think Ryan Hartman's the beneficiary of not only what he brings to the table, but also his surroundings.
Yeah. And the thing that's really impressed me about this Minnesota Wild group, yes, you have your Ryan Hartmans, your Kirill Kaprizovs, but how about this, Nick? Besides Nick Bukestad, who for whatever reason just hasn't found the production piece this year, 3 points for him in 23 games. Jordy Ben's got 2 points on the year, and Mason Shaw has a single game played. What a great story Mason Shaw has been, by the way. But and Jared Spurgeon has been hurt, so he's only has 18 games, but 8 points for him. Everybody else above that in the lineup has 9 points or better. So let me put that to you this way: if they played all 26 games, they're sitting at just under 0.35 points per game, which statistically doesn't sound like a lot, but anything close to 0.5 points per game, even 0.4 points per game is pretty good, especially for guys in the back end, your John Merrills, your fourth line guys, your Brandon Duhaimes. And one of the guys that's in there is Victor Rask, who has 9 points in 16 games played. So he's doing even better when he's been in the lineup and contributing offensively. So not only have the Wild look good, they've really spread the wealth. Dmitry Kulikov is just under half a point per game player, 12 points in 25 games. The contributions have been everywhere.
As a depth defenseman.
Yeah, unreal. Rem Pitlick, 10 points in 16 games for him. Matt Dumba's having a great season. He's kind of cooled off production-wise as of late, but I still think that he's continuing to drive the play offensively. Is there a guy, I guess let's throw it to you this way before we head over to our extra ice session. My final question, obviously fans should be excited about watching this team. Is there one guy that continues to surprise you? Or on the other side, is there one guy that you're feeling is kind of the last link to this chain that needs to kind of hit that extra gear for this Wild team to take it to the next level?
I think there is one guy that needs to elevate a little bit. That's Jordan Greenway. I think that he has been trending in that right direction. For a guy of his size, you see when he plays a physical style that, he can be very impactful on a hockey game. But he's also, a former World Junior, participant for Team USA. He's got some finesse to his game. He's got some offense. We've seen that here in pieces, with him. But if he can maybe start stringing that together a little bit more consistently, I think that could be holy cow for this Minnesota Wild squad. Someone who's impressed me the most. Honestly, I don't think this could come as a surprise. How about Marcus Felino?
Yeah.
And not in terms of what he brings on and off the ice, but his offense, I mean, holy cow, just such a smart player. It's all around, just again, being a leader on this team. He's willing to go to war for his teammates. So he's got the grit, he's got the finesse, he's got the smarts. He's a very smart hockey player. I think that often gets overlooked with Marcus Felino. He's very, very smart in terms of his hockey IQ. And then we've seen him, he's got how many power play goals this season, or 3 or 4? And that's like more than he's had his entire career combined. So he's getting points. So he's producing offensively. He's kind of like an all-around player. And I guess for me, it's been surprising to me to see a guy that's been kind of known as more of, kind of a grinder type, be able to, also produce offensively. So I've really been liking what I've seen of a complete picture with Marcus Felino, AKA the Moose.
Yeah. Marcus Felino, like you mentioned, 4 power play goals to his credit before this season. He has 3 this year for a total of 7 in his career for power play goals. Power play points, he has 4 assists this year, 18 total in his career for power play assists, and a guy that overall 17 points in 26 games for him, and a guy that, like you mentioned, he's not a player that when he came to Minnesota, I mean, he was kind of the guy a little bit more in Buffalo just because of their depleted lineup, but really has solidified himself not only as a good offensive producer, but he's a guy you wouldn't want to meet in an alleyway if he was ticked off at you. But he's also a guy you love to meet in an alleyway if you needed some help, because he's a great human being, off the ice, and, treats his teammates with respect and that sort of thing. So should be fun. We got a lot of Minnesota Wild hockey, of course, to catch up on this weekend, as well as moving into this week. So definitely in the next week, get a chance to check out some Minnesota Wild hockey, because the week after they do have a couple days off in the stretch between Dallas and Detroit there as well. Nick, let's head over to some extra ice session things here. And we've got a play that shocked the hockey world that we're going to discuss. And welcome in, folks. Extra ice session here. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon. Nick, if you haven't seen this play that we're about to discuss, you should stop living under a rock. I'm not talking you specifically, Nick. I'm talking our listeners. What an amazing play that this was from the Anaheim Ducks. Sonny Milano and Trevor Zegras. Trevor Zegras doing the pseudo Michigan, if you will, essentially curling the puck up on his stick and throwing it over top of the net. And Sonny Milano, also a very important piece of this play, able to come around the other side and bat the puck out of the air. And one of the highlight reel goals, potentially not only goal of the year, but I would say potentially goal of the 2000s, honestly, with how good that play was. I mean, that was right up there with one of the best that we've seen in recent memory. Before we get to what the actual topic of today's extra ice session is, when you saw that play for the first time, 1, how many times did you rewatch it on your Twitter feed? And number 2, what were your first reactions?
Oh gosh, at least a dozen times. Because initially I tweeted out that, or at least I thought that he had actually banked it off of the goalie's back of his helmet. But then watching some of those close-up shots of it, I realized that Sonny Milano batted out of midair, and then it was just, and I think my initial reaction was, I think that even Trevor Zegras, his face was just like completely in shock. Like, did that just work? Like, yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, just huge smile. Wonderful to see that kind of skill. And, it's one thing, Noah, that, in practice, I think as hockey players, you see this more than any other sport where, you're kind of screwing around and, you have these sort of, trick plays on your stick. Like I know Austin Matthews kind of started that move with the Zorro on his stick and, but you see that more as goofing around. And then, you see something like that where something clicks and all of a sudden you're actually trying to do it in game. I mean, we saw this with St. Cloud with Jan Michaela doing the Michigan against North Dakota. It's one of those things where I don't know if as a player, it's hard to really encapsulate because there really isn't a thought process. It's more just like something just clicks and you just do it. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a confidence thing. It's a creativity thing. It's not something when you're like, no, I'm going to try that on the bench. It just kind of happens. And so for the fact that Zegras saw the opportunity and decided to give it a shot and it actually got executed, it was wonderful to see.
Yeah. Before we get to some story time here, Nick, I want to follow up. I'm kind of trying to set the stage here a little bit. If you had to rate scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, oh my gosh, that was the most unreal thing I've ever seen in my life, and 1 being, I've seen better at a Pee Wee hockey game. what would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? And for someone who doesn't watch hockey, because this video got a lot of traction in the non-hockey world and kind of put some NHL stuff on the map. If you had to describe it, in a sentence or a short blurb for someone who doesn't watch hockey, I know that's kind of tough, so I'm trying to buy you some time to think about it. How would you describe it, and what would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10?
How would I describe it? This is an alley-oop at basketball. Honestly, that's it. You don't see that. And I think even for a very casual hockey fan, they know that you don't see the puck being flipped over the net intentionally or even unintentionally very often, and someone bats it out of midair. Sort of like that. It's not something you see. I think Sidney Crosby has kind of perfected, how to bat the puck out of the air with the stick. I mean, just incredible hand-eye coordination, but, to have it to be involved with two players, right? So one to actually corral the puck, then purposely lob it over the net, and then two to have a player waiting for not only one to get the puck below the crossbar, so it's a legal play, and then to make the contact to get it past the goaltender. He wasn't far, so there's not much room up there to be able to execute that. I think even most casual fans understand that was something new, and that was something very, very difficult. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 followed by a 0. Definitely gets a 10.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, it was just one of those skill plays. And those are the things that, you do where not necessarily the Michigan scoop, but you flip it over the net and you hope you have a teammate there, but the play's got to be at the right time. You hope that the player that's there makes contact and doesn't hit a foul ball, so to speak. There's a lot of pieces that have to go together, and that's in a men's rec hockey game, let alone in the National Hockey League level. I mean, impressive that what you can do. What's up?
So, for those, and this question was asked too, was this the first time we've seen this? The actual answer is no. Was it the first time it was executed? Yes. Pavel Datsyuk actually tried this for Detroit, where he lobbed the puck over the net, although I'm pretty sure that there was nobody waiting to bat it out of midair. I think it was more of trying to create chaos and maybe have someone find a loose puck in the slot. So it wasn't a coordinated type thing, which makes this play so cool to think about. Was this, this was a planned play right between these two. But, not the first time, but it's been how long? Probably over a decade since that original play took place. And I can't remember of anything in between that actually, even an attempt of that. So not the first time we've seen it, but seeing the reactions across the country and some of the hockey practice, this has quickly become quite the trend in the hockey practices, even the youth hockey. It's been kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, most people would agree with you. There's a certain analyst here, and this is going to be the crutch of our story, that thinks that it was a skill play, no doubt, but has some qualms about it. So I'm going to fill out the listeners in with some story time here. This comes from John Tortorella, former Columbus Blue Jackets, Tampa Bay Lightning, New York Rangers bench boss.
Oh, wait, Torts is upset to say no way.
Yeah. Hey, Connor McDavid needs to just shut up and play hockey, right? Nonetheless, this is what John Tortorella said about this. So buckle your seatbelts here. We're going to have some paragraph story time here. He said, quote, "It's tremendously skilled. For Sonny Milano even to yell Michigan in the middle of a play in a game is a skill. That's a skill play. My position, though, is it good for the game? I'm not so sure. And again, I'm not trying to be a fool here, but I'm just not so sure it's great for the game. If you did that back in 2000s, late 90s, 2000, you get your head taken off. It's cool. It's cool to watch and all that, but I'm not so sure it's good for the game. I'd have a talk with the people, meaning Sonny Milano and Trevor Zegras, after the game. I would. Again, I'm not trying to be difficult about it. It's fun to watch. It's really cool. I just think our game has gone so far away of what the game should be. A hard game, an honest game. It's almost gotten too showman. I know you need to have it. You need to sell the game. But just from the ilk that it's still a hard game to play and a good, honest hockey game needs to be played. I think some of this stuff, we just get carried away. Nick, I don't know that there's going back to your Bruce Boudreau comment with the women's hockey team. There's only so many ways that you can play hockey, so to speak. Well, Trevor Zegras and Sonny Milano just invented a new one. It makes me think back to when some kid in the QMJHL named, I don't know, Sidney Crosby or something did some between the legs goal. And then everybody on planet Earth was doing that play in their garage after they saw that sort of play. Some guy named Pavel Datsyuk who came in and absolutely undressed Thomas Vokoun and shipped a puck over his shoulder. Everybody was trying that. Like you mentioned, the Zorro with Austin Matthews. I don't get this. I don't understand it. Yes, hockey's a hard game. That's what makes it so special, John Tortorella, is that the game is so difficult to be able to pull that play off at high speed and have the skill and creativity. I don't get the whole you would have gotten your head taken off, man. If it was 1999 and I could do that and set up Brian Rolston cruising down the slot and doing that and get my head taken off, I'd sign up for that in a heartbeat. That was unreal. Nick, I know you read the comments from John Tortorella. What do you think?
I would have loved to have seen John Tortorella be born 30 years prior. And here's why I say that. Let's go back to the history and the development of hockey. It's always been trending this way. Maybe a lot of our even casual listeners to look at one point, you couldn't pass the puck forward in hockey. That was an illegal play. Yeah, let's think about that for a second. You couldn't pass the puck forward. Not that long ago, in fact, was it 2013? The 2-line rule, that the red line, the 2-line pass was still in effect. So you couldn't pass the puck forward more than 2 lines. It was only 1 line, right? So I wonder if that's what he means. Honest, stupid, boring hockey to watch. Anyway, I can kind of dissect this a little bit. So essentially, I don't know if he actually disagrees with the play. I think he actually has a broader view of what's happened in the game of hockey. I don't know if he wants the Mike Keenan version of hockey of late 80s Oilers and early 90s Rangers kind of thing, where, it's the man's game. It's this hard hitting, sort of just, brawling kind of thing. I don't know, but, that's kind of the impression I get. Whereas, the game has significantly evolved to be the skill and speed and, just unbelievable creativity too. The last probably, I would say at least 15 years. And at the end of it, we've kind of, I wouldn't say we entered a new frontier, but you talk about some of these rule changes that where offense, has continued to grow in hockey. And it's funny, back a while ago, Noah, I'm going to get a little long-winded here, so I apologize. I actually, at one point, I defended how a game in hockey that ended up 1-0 in overtime was just as much fun as a 6-5 game. I have to say, even going back and looking at that, depending on the game, I'm completely dead wrong. And it's funny that for the game of hockey, which is still continuing to try to grow its marketability to the casual fans out there. What's wrong with this, especially when you had hours later, people outside the hockey world talking about it. And you had people even within the hockey were going, what the hell did I just witness? That's good for the game. So when I don't know what he gets, why this is bad for the game. Yeah. The only thing that I can think of is him being old school and his brain stuck in 1979 would be that. Let me finish real quick. Is that, for him, with all these skill plays, he sees, because again, he was a head coach. He sees all the stuff that happened in practice, right? So he's been on that same side that you and I, which I discussed earlier, where you usually see this in practice, not on a game day type thing. So I think for him, he's going, this is just guys goofing around. This is just showmanship. This isn't a skilled play. When the reality is, everybody else that watches the game, they don't see that practice. They don't see the skill a lot of these players really have. They just, again, these are low percentage plays. And that's a big reason why you don't see him in the NHL, because every player defends well, and with these creative plays, the ability to execute them it's very slim. So, but now that one has, right, all of a sudden now it's showmanship and not an actual execution of skill, which I think is where he's entirely wrong to begin there.
Yeah, well, I might be a little bit old school. I actually do love a 1-0 hockey game, but like you mentioned, it has to be the right game. A 1-0 hockey game, if it's a goalie duel, where it's high flying action, where it almost is going to take a mountain to climb to beat one of the goaltenders. That's where it's interesting. If it's a flat 1-0 game, it's not exciting. But if it's high flying, just like a 6-5 game would be, but all but one of the goals was a grade A save and unreal defensive play, then I think it's exciting. But beyond that, I tried to think about, okay, well, how do I justify his comments? Like if I'm John Tortorella, what do I really mean here? And the only thing that I can come up with is, does he mean it along the lines of players are becoming too, I don't know, soft, or trying to do things that aren't, like tenacious, hard on plays where like you can make like, for example, the knock on Austin Matthews is that he's an unreal goal scorer, but you couldn't get him to go in the corner for the first 3 years of his career, essentially, because he wasn't a physical player. I mean, is that what John Tortorella is saying, is that we can't lose the physicality and tenacity of the game in lieu of players that can make these plays, but are fragile as all get out, essentially, or can't play the physical part of the game or the gritty part of the game too. But I think that this NHL has bred the best of both worlds. You have your Matthew Tkachuks, your players who they have that unreal skill, but they also can, drop the gloves and have the fisticuffs and, have a brother that gets his hand bitten off, so to speak. There are so many reasons to love the game of hockey and love the NHL because of the way the skill is played, your Kirill Kaprizovs, all that jazz. Yeah, I mean, you don't want players to stop hitting each other entirely and just trying to do circus acts. I mean, I guess I get that because it's not a high percentage play. I guess I understand that. But as far as a one-off event where the timing absolutely worked and the players who even scored it were shocked that it worked, enjoy the moment and move on and enjoy what it means for the National Hockey League, in my opinion. That's the only way that I can think of where maybe he's coming from. But nonetheless, I mean, Nick, I don't know about you, but I definitely don't see every NHL player suddenly trying to do these ridiculous wild plays, or Yami Krannila for the next 20 games for the Huskies trying to do the Michigan every time he comes behind the net. It's just right place, right time, and right skill.
True. And there's a reason why John Tortorella's office is at ESPN and not an NHL bench. Let's just put it that way. So that is a shot to John Tortorella a little bit. I'm not going to lie. He's a great soundbite, but at the end of the day, I do think the game has kind of passed him by as far as where the game is headed. And this, I think, is just another example of that. I just don't think he understands that he's caught in this play from between Zegras, and all this is showing off. And this is nothing more. And, it's that cutesy little, now you're just being a show off here. I think that's where he's like, you'd have your head taken off comment kind of thing. Whereas this isn't hockey. This is just, a circus act. This isn't real hockey. No, John, that's a high skill play first of all, just to get the puck on your stick and to control it, to perfectly lob it over the net, and to have another player recognize that, go with it, wait for the puck to get below the crossbar, smack it above the goalie's shoulder, who was in his butterfly. There wasn't a lot of room there, again, as I mentioned before, and then to actually put it in the net. So, again, I think it's just a different way of looking at the game. Now, granted, he's been around the game a lot more than I have, and he will always have a lot more NHL credence to him than I will. But I just think that, again, for John Tortorella, I think he's flat out wrong here. It's good for the game. I think it's good for the fans, especially. That's exciting stuff to watch. And like you mentioned, is this a play that we're going to see night in, night out? No. Not at all. But maybe we do see more of it. Again, between the legs goal, we see that skill being practiced, even on the power play. James Van Riemsdyk's really good at that. Matt Boldy, a wild prospect, really good at that. So, it's one of those things where now, it forces people to defend a little bit differently. It shows that you have something else in the bag. It's another area of deception, right? Isn't that the whole thing in hockey? Is you have to be deceptive of what you do. So that's a hockey play, John. Sorry. So I don't know. At the end of the day, I loved it. I think it's great that these guys pulled it off. Again, that will be live in infamy. Might be the goal of the decade, and we're not, just barely 1 year into this thing. So what a play, and what a great day for the NHL to be in the spotlight for a little bit.
Yeah, funny to think that he says it's not real hockey. Last time I checked, the puck was legally batted in over the goal line. I think that's always been the same in the rule book for years and years to come. Maybe John's just salty because he can't do it himself. I also probably can't do it either. But nonetheless, what we can do is we can keep you informed here about Huskies hockey and Minnesota Wild hockey. Like you mentioned, women's hockey off until New Year's, January 1st. They're going to be in Pittsburgh facing Penn State. Men's hockey off until December 30th. They're going to be up in Bemidji that Friday and then following at home on Saturday.
First.
Yep. Oh, 31st. Yes. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that.
Yeah.
You know what I meant. Right before New Year's. New Year's is when hockey's happening for Huskies hockey. That's what we're trying to say. As far as professional hockey is concerned, the Minnesota Wild, we're recording tonight on Saturday. They're playing LA tonight, looking for their 9th straight win. Vegas tomorrow night on Sunday. Carolina Tuesday, Buffalo Thursday, Florida Sunday, and Dallas on Monday before a couple of days off before welcoming or heading to Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, or welcoming one of the two. That's a long ways out. We'll keep you updated, of course, for episode number 92, and we will see you soon here in the den.
one-timer. Come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores. Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.